You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in 1 Kings 10. The Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. 1 Kings 10 presents Solomon at the height of his wisdom, wealth, and international influence. The chapter shows the fulfillment of many of God's promises to Solomon, but it also begins to reveal some warning signs beneath the splendor of his kingdom. Solomon possessed wisdom beyond other kings of his day. He accumulated astonishing wealth, and this chapter gives us very specific details about that. And he attracted visitors from distant lands. And yet, even at his greatest, Solomon points beyond himself to a greater king, whose wisdom, glory, and kingdom will never fade. The chapter opens with the arrival of the Queen of Sheba. She heard reports about Solomon's fame and his relationship with the Lord, so she traveled to Jerusalem to test him with difficult questions. She arrived with an impressive caravan carrying spices and gold and precious stones, and nothing she asked proved too difficult for Solomon. In verse 3 we read, "And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her." And the queen didn't only hear Solomon's wisdom, she saw the kingdom his wisdom produced. She observed his palace, the food on his table, the organization of his officials, the clothing of his servants, and the offerings he made at the house of the Lord. And in verse 5, Scripture says, there was no more breath in her, meaning everything exceeded what she expected. And she confessed that she hadn't believed the reports until she saw Solomon's kingdom for herself. And then she declared in verse 7, "Behold, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpass the report that I heard." The queen's response is especially significant because she recognized that Solomon's success ultimately came from God. In verse 9 we read, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness." Solomon's wisdom wasn't just an impressive personal quality. It was a gift from God, and it was intended to bless God's people and display God's greatness. Even a foreign queen could see that something extraordinary was happening in Israel. The queen then gave Solomon 120 talents of gold, along with spices and precious stones. And Solomon, in turn, gave her everything she desired and then sent her home. And the remainder of the chapter describes Solomon's enormous wealth. Gold flowed into Jerusalem. Solomon made shields from gold, and he constructed an elaborate ivory throne that was overlaid with gold, and then he accumulated ships and horses and chariots and silver and precious stones and other valuable goods on top of all of that. Verse 23 says, "Thus Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom." People from throughout the world wanted to meet Solomon. They came seeking his wisdom, and they brought valuable gifts with them when they sought it. From a human perspective, Solomon's kingdom looked almost unbeatable. Israel's king possessed wisdom, wealth, military resources, international influence, and worldwide recognition. And yet Scripture gives us reasons to look at Solomon's prosperity carefully. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 16 and 17, God commanded Israel's kings not to multiply horses or silver or gold or wives for themselves. But yet, in 1 Kings 10, Solomon begins accumulating enormous quantities of horses and wealth. And then the next chapter reveals the multiplication of wives as well. And then later in the book of 1 Kings, we start to see that Solomon multiplied wives as well. The blessings God gave Solomon gradually became things that Solomon accumulated without restraint. And this reminds us that receiving God's blessings and using them faithfully aren't always the same thing. Prosperity can actually create its own spiritual dangers when we take God's gifts and we start replacing Him with the gifts that He's given. Our affection starts to go toward the gifts, and we turn them into idols. And as many people look at what happened to Solomon, that's what they begin to see. But 1 Kings chapter 10 also points us toward Jesus in a remarkable way. Jesus specifically referred to the Queen of Sheba when he was speaking to people who refused to recognize who stood before them. In Matthew 12:42, Jesus said this, "The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The queen traveled a great distance because she heard about Solomon's wisdom. And when she arrived, she discovered that the reports didn't fully capture his greatness. And yet Jesus said someone greater than Solomon had arrived. Solomon possessed wisdom from God, but Jesus is the wisdom of God. Again, we're reminded of that in 1 Corinthians 1:24. Solomon answered difficult questions, but Jesus knows every heart. Solomon ruled Israel for a generation, but Jesus reigns forever. Solomon accumulated earthly riches, but Jesus possesses all things. Solomon even attracted people from distant nations, but Jesus is gathering people from every tribe and language and people and nation. We see that in Revelation 5:9. There's also an important contrast between the two kings. Solomon's glory eventually faded. His heart turned away from wholehearted devotion to God, and after his death, his kingdom divided. Jesus will never experience such a decline. His righteousness is perfect, his wisdom is flawless, and his kingdom is eternal. Solomon's throne displayed very impressive earthly splendor, but Jesus occupies the throne that truly matters. He isn't simply another wise king in Israel's history. He's the promised son of David, whose kingdom will never end. The queen of Sheba heard about Solomon and came searching, and what she discovered surpassed what she expected. Well, in an even greater way, the more we know Jesus, the more we discover that his greatness surpasses every earthly king, every possession, every achievement, and every other source of wisdom. And just as the queen of Sheba traveled from a distant nation to Jerusalem to see Solomon in his glory and to hear his wisdom, the nations will one day come to Jerusalem to worship Jesus, the greater son of David, as he reigns as king. Solomon's international fame gives us a small preview of the worldwide glory of Christ's kingdom that's prophetically spoken of in books like Isaiah, Zechariah, and Revelation. 1 Kings 10 allows us to see Solomon at the summit of earthly greatness. But even Solomon at his best was only a shadow of the king who is coming. Jesus is greater than Solomon. And unlike Solomon's kingdom, his glory will never fade. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.